mind, as long as no one else minds, I don't mind. Yeah. So I'm gonna share my screen and hopefully you can see. And I will also play the slideshow. So the topic for today, with God's grace and your prayers, is building a hedge around your marriage. Building a hedge around your marriage, and we'll talk about what a hedge is. But before we do that, I just wanted to introduce myself. I was born and raised in New York, and I just moved out to California maybe 2 or 3 months ago. I'm in Los Angeles County, and my career has always been in finance. But while I was in finance, I studied marriage and family therapy, and I have a master's in marriage and family therapy, and I'm registered in California as an associate MFT now. I love working with couples, and I'm very passionate about healthy marriages. And I think it takes a lot of work. There's a lot of things that we weren't taught when we were younger. So I really want everyone to take in as much information as you can, because I believe every marriage has hope if with God's grace and a lot of hard work. So building a hedge around your marriage. The integrity of our marriages is being challenged. The integrity of our marriages is being challenged. And here are some of the challenges that our marriages are facing today. First, I want to tell you about marriage in general and some of the challenges that marriage in general, like as a construct, is facing. And then I want to tell you about some of the challenges that our individual marriages are facing, like my marriage, your marriage. These are challenges that we're facing. In general, there's a trend of comparison against others and other couples, which leads to a strong sense of lacking or falling behind, where there's so much comparing is going on. And the social media is not helping with that, because you're always shown these snapshots of good things that are going on. And it really makes you wonder, what's going on with mine? Why don't I have the same happy memory? But you don't see what's going on with other people. But comparison is one of the challenges that marriages in general are facing. Also, there's a devaluation of marriage as a healthy construct or arrangement. So society now is not telling us that marriage is this very high thing. Now, what society is telling us is marriage is just like, you know, if you want to do it, you can, but you don't have to do it. It's not that big of a deal. You can still cohabitate or stay with your partner, and it doesn't really matter. There's nothing. It's more of like a thing that some people decide to do. So society is devaluing marriage in general. Also, in general, marriage is being divorced from God's design and intention for it. And I want to remind you, where did marriage come from? God invented it. Like, it came from God. So it's not like it was there before. I mean, he's the one who created the concept of marriage, this construct, this thing that people do. God was the one who created it. But when you separate God from it, that creates a lot of questions and a lot of lost reference points that we need in marriage for us to be successful and have a healthy marriage. Also, there are inadequate messages from society and our community about what it takes to maintain a thriving marriage. The fact that we have to do work, and that we have to work hard, and we have to keep working hard, and that there's work, and what are the actual things that we have to do, those things, our society and culture are not telling us what those things are. All we're seeing is people getting married, and they're completely underestimating how much work needs to be done. And I love when I'm working with couples in premarital counseling or in premarital work, and somebody said to them, you should do this premarital stuff, you should do that, you should read these books, whatever. And then in the middle of the sessions, one time they say, I can't imagine having gotten married without doing this work. My marriage would have been so messed up. And you watch big problems that could have taken 5 or 6 years to recover from, 10 years to recover from, are getting resolved in just a few months or just a few weeks before they even get married. That's just one example. But there's a lot of things that need to be done. So that's, in general, some of the challenges that our marriages are facing today. But now about our individual marriages. So think about this from a personal perspective for your own marriage. there's a low appreciation for straightforward changes. One thing that's very hard for me to deal with, or maybe not hard, but just frustrating to deal with, is when a husband or a wife or a fiance or a fiancée doesn't appreciate that they need to change the way they speak, or they need to change the way they're treating their spouse, or the priority they're giving to other people over their partner. So there are sometimes just some simple changes. You have to make those changes. And if you don't make them, you can predict that you're going to have trouble in marriage. And sometimes it's just a matter of lowering the volume of your voice, or pulling back when there's a disagreement and you're not going anywhere. There are some changes that sometimes they're straightforward and we need to make them, but we don't appreciate them. And these are in every home, almost every home. Also, there's a mismanagement of, lack of awareness of, and lack of responsibility for unreasonable expectations and negative thought patterns. What that means, and by the way, this is the most text-heavy slide that I'm going to go through, so bear with me on this slide. But I want us to just appreciate the challenges we're facing. So what I mean here is that we enter into marriage with a handful, and sometimes way, way, way too many unreasonable expectations. So maybe we're expecting our spouse to fulfill all of our emotional needs that were not satisfied from our family of origin. So for example, very common example, our parents weren't very affectionate. They didn't say, I love you. They didn't encourage you. When you got a 98 on an exam, they told you, what about the other 2 points? And so after 10 to 20 or 30 years, you don't have self-confidence. You don't feel loved. You have poor emotional attachment. You're uncertain if you're loved or not. And you're looking for your spouse to just keep dumping love and affirmation on you all the time. And whenever you're unsure, you're looking for them to satisfy that lack or that need from your family of origin. But this is an unreasonable expectation, and this is not fair to your spouse, and it's not fair to you. And we don't manage these things well sometimes. The last few things are an unhealthy level of busyness. We are so busy, and actually sometimes we think that busyness is the validation that we have as a person. I am valuable, I am worth it because I'm so busy. And we point to the busyness to say, look at how important I am, or how good my life is, or how productive I am, or how valuable I am to the people around me because I'm so busy. Our culture glorifies busyness. And we even, we have this small sense of satisfaction when someone says, hey man, how's it going? And then you say, yeah, I'm so busy. So much is going on. I'm so tired, right? And you kind of feel this sense of, I have a good answer when someone asks me how I'm doing. I tell them I'm so busy because that's what's going on in my life, and I can say that. But this is not good. And another thing is poor behaviors from well-intentioned in-laws or other family members. In-laws are wonderful, of course, almost all the time, but sometimes they don't know how to let a couple grow and launch and thrive independently. They don't know how to let them go and to have a healthy boundary. And so a lot of times there's a lot of guilt messages that come from your parents. You never call me, you don't visit, what's going on, and there's so many of these types of things, right? And maybe sometimes you get overly invited by your in-laws or other family members who are asking too much information about about what's going on in your relationship or in your home. So these are poor behaviors that are difficult for each couple to manage. The last two things are a failure to completely shift from a single mindset. When you're married, once you get married, you're in a new stage. Something is lost and something is gained. It's kind of like when St. Paul says that unless a seed dies, it can't grow into a plant, right? So usually when you go from one stage of life to another one, You are grieving the loss of something because you lost something. You're giving something up, you are. And you're gaining something. And think about any parent when they have children, right? You're giving something up for like 20 years. You're going to give something up. All that flexibility, all that freedom, all the money that you used to spend completely on yourself or however you wanted, now you're losing a lot. You're losing something and you have to grieve that, but you're also gaining something. So one of the things that people don't shift from soon enough when they get married is spending way too much time with their friends, right? Like, and it's not an issue to spend time with your friends, and it's not an issue at all to have your own friendships. But sometimes these friendships come at a cost to your spouse and to your marriage. And so we need to just shift the way we're balancing it. I'm not saying to drop all of your friends or anything like that, but we need to shift the way we're balancing it. Lastly is poor integration of God in our personal life and married life. And we're going to talk about this. But God is not just this thing here, this box here, and we access the box every Sunday, or we access the box every night when we pray. That's not how God should be in our homes or in our marriages. So I want to give you a helpful perspective. This is your marriage. This is your marriage. And I'm going to say something that's a little complicated, but please follow me. And if anyone's having trouble following me, please feel free to interrupt. Think of your marriage as a third entity, Like there's you, there's your spouse, and then there's your marriage. So think of it as a third entity. And that's, by the way, what a therapist does a lot, which is the therapist doesn't just think about, oh, there's these two people. The therapist thinks about the relationship itself and what's going on with this third entity, right? And because the reason I want you to challenge yourself to do this is because right now, for most of us, what we know or what we think about our marriage is our experience of our own marriage. Let me say that again. What we think about our marriage is the same as our experience of our marriage. So if you're not happy with your marriage, or if there's a problem in your marriage, you think your marriage is messed up, or you think your spouse is the problem. But you have to think about the marriage as a separate thing. Step back, step out, and look at your marriage as this separate entity. And these are all the challenges that we just described. Behavioral changes that need to be made, unreasonable expectations, busyness, disintegrated spirituality, comparison. All of these things are things that are challenges that your marriage is facing. You can see it's a very sad picture, actually, that you have this beautiful marriage that you're supposed to care for and love, and that you're called to build, but it even before it starts, from the day you're born, sometimes your marriage is being challenged. There's a very famous book called Saving Your Marriage Before It Starts. And that's really important, because sometimes our marriages are sabotaged even before they started, even before you met the person you're going to get married to. But this is a sad picture. So we need to build a hedge. What is a hedge? What is a hedge? I want you to see these pictures here, and I'll put the laser pointer on. This grass, or these bushes here that are all tightly packed next to each other, are a hedge. Okay, they're a hedge, and they're protecting this house against anything that's trying to get in. Okay, same here in this picture here. This is a hedge, right? And the dictionary.com, where I get all definitions, says that a hedge is a barrier or a protection against something. And sometimes a hedge is informally called a living fence. The Bible actually speaks about hedges in many times, but I want to give you just a few verses. One was Satan was critical of God's protection of Job. And everybody knows the story of Job. At the very first chapter, Satan goes to God and says, this guy Job, we need to attack him. I want to mess his life up. Okay, he's too close to you and I want to mess his life up. But one of the things that Satan says to God, he says to him, have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has on every side? So Satan says, of course, Of course, Job loves you. Of course, you put a hedge around him. In other words, Satan is saying you protected him from so many things, right? That's one mention. Another mention of a hedge is when David says in the very beautiful Psalm, Psalm 139, I think we all know this Psalm, where it's such a beautiful Psalm that talks about how God knows everything about us. He says, you have hedged me behind and before and laid your hand upon me. David says that God cares for us. He put a hedge around us. He protects us and cares for us. This is so beautiful how much God cares for us. And lastly, in the parable of the tenants, Jesus explains what happens when you first build a vineyard. He says a parable. He says, here another parable. There was a certain landowner who planted a vineyard and set a hedge around it. It's like one of the first things you do when you build a vineyard. You have this crop you're trying to build, and you put a hedge around it to protect it. Okay, this is what a hedge is. So we need to make a hedge in our marriage. And this is, think of this image here. Before, I showed you that there was just your marriage and all of these challenges around it. But now we want to build a hedge. And your hedge, then the hedge that is around our marriage, is made up of 5 things. First, it's skills. Second, it's spiritual awareness. Third, it's sophisticating your perspective. Fourth, it's resources. And fifth, it's proactive behaviors. And look now at this image, with this hedge around our marriage. These challenges have a long way to go to get to our marriage when there's a hedge, a proper hedge in place that we need to build. And I just want to tell you that I wasn't planning to speak about the problems, like these problems out here so much, because like we can spend a lot of time focusing on the problems themselves and what to do one by one, but I want to focus on the hedge itself. How are we going to build a barrier to protect our marriage from these challenges? So the first thing is skills. The first thing is skills. Skills are not the same as personality traits. I want to say that to encourage everyone, because sometimes we think, oh, it's not my personality to be a good communicator, for example, or to be good, or some people think it's my personality to be very angry. Like I have an angry personality. But actually, we need to learn skills. Skills are things that you can learn. It's the same way you learn how to ride a bike. You can learn a skill that we're going to talk about today. And sometimes this is a difficult message that some of us may have a hard time accepting. But sometimes you need to learn skills in order to discipline yourself out of character flaws. And this is a very important message. Sometimes, my brothers and sisters, we have character flaws. There is something wrong with my character. And I go into marriage and I'm married, and then all of a sudden I find I'm confronted with this problem. I used to get away with yelling when I'm angry. I used to get away with being late all the time. Or I used to get away with overly relying on certain people in my life. But now I'm married and I find my spouse is not accepting this. My spouse is having a very hard time because my spouse is affected the most by my character flaws. And I need skills to grow out of my character flaws. And this is really important. Sometimes we have a problem in marriage. The problem isn't the other person. Let me just pause and say that again. When you have a problem in marriage, the problem isn't always the other person. Actually, the problem is you, and the problem is the system, the problem is the other person. It's all of the above together, okay? So we have to remember that. It's not just one person. So I want to cover 5 skills quickly. And again, each one of these is a whole talk in and of itself. And by the way, if anyone wants to interrupt me or say something, please feel free. Like I'll take questions now or later. The first set of skills is communication skills. And I'm going to go through these quickly. First is communication. Appreciate that small changes in how we say something can change the way that a message is received. So if you change what you're saying in a small way, that can change how your message is received. For example, you can start off, if you have a criticism, first of all, probably it's very unlikely that any criticism will be received. Let me just put that there in the first place. It is so hard for criticism to be received. That's it. So be very careful if you're going to give criticism, okay? Number two, if you have something that's a little negative that you want to say or a little difficult to accept, start off by saying something positive. Start off by saying something positive. And like, you know, sometimes at the beginning of a session with a couple, we come in, we start the session, and right at the beginning, they start want to talk about problems. So I say, hey guys, 1 second, I have a question. Can you tell me something that went well this past week since the last time we spoke? I want to see, like, can we choose to say something positive? Because you can choose to say something positive, and you can choose to focus on the positive. Also, listen carefully and with a genuine motivation to understand your spouse. You have to shift your heart in a way where you want to understand what's going on by asking questions and not submitting to your own assumptions. Don't just let them go. Don't just let your assumptions take control of you. Ask questions and understand. I want to tell you that for the rest of your life, you will always have something to learn about your spouse. For the rest of your life, you will always have something to learn about your spouse. So when there is a communication breakdown, the first thing you should do is say, what don't I know about my spouse right now? How can I learn more? How can I understand my spouse better? That's usually the core of what's going on in a communication breakdown. And when someone doesn't feel understood, that's usually the core of what the issue is about. They don't feel understood. Number two is boundary setting. Say no to things that push you beyond your capacity or that impose on the values that you and your spouse have. And boundary setting is simply saying no, or is creating time, like separation of time between yourself and someone else that's imposing on your marriage or imposing on your values, or it's physical distance, or it's just not talking to someone for a while, or it's not talking to someone at all, and we have to be able to set boundaries. Or it could be that maybe I have become so consumed with serving in church, and that is interfering with my time at home with my family. Each partner is responsible for managing the boundaries with his or her biological family. Please don't let the daughter-in-law go and say have to manage a boundary with her in-laws, or the son-in-law have to manage boundaries with his in-laws. It's usually always the biological child whenever possible. See your relationship with your spouse as a top priority above all other relationships. And there's a very nice tip that I always like to give couples, which is choose the relationship. No matter what's going on, choose what is good for the relationship. Like, this is what you have to put above everything. Next is negotiation and teamwork. It's no longer about doing things your way. And couples can very easily get stuck. Like, we need to get the kids out of the house. Well, who's going to do what to help them? And they disagree, so they get stuck. Something stopped working in the house or in the home. And then how are we going to repair it? Or this is so frustrating, and they get stuck. So it's not about my way or your way. It's about just moving forward. We need to move forward unless it's a very significant issue where we need to stop and pause. And if there's a repeated problem, you need to lean on your communication skills to work through creating a change in what's going on. Next is stress management. Identify stressors in your own life, and make direct efforts to manage them. And let me just pause. I want to just see, are there any questions from anyone?
There's a
Yes.
question if you don't mind.
Yes.
So yeah, for this previous point, so what if they got stuck and there's no solution? And I think that maybe after stucking, they got used to stuck in every decision or every, maybe if it's a very silly thing, okay,
Yes.
and it started to be personal, okay. So what do you recommend? I don't want to interfere, but if you're planning to solve that afterwards, it's okay.
No, thank you, Abuna. I really appreciate that question. So, of course, it's case by case, depending on the actual what they're stuck on. But let me just give you to kind of give people some comfort and perspective. There will always be things that you're just going to be different in for the rest of your lives, right? Like as a couple, the goal is not to agree on every single thing and never ever disagree and never be different. This is impossible. This is impossible. Okay, so first set your expectations that we're going to differ. We're going to differ. Now the question is, have we tried everything to resolve this? And if it's a very serious thing, because some things are serious, then we have to get expert advice, and we're going to talk about resources later. But we have to know that when we differ, we have to sometimes just pull back. Like if we're getting stuck and we always have the same disagreement, the same conflict every time, it happens over and over again. So what are you going to do if you don't see a way out? Then you have to pull back. You have to just accept that you're not going to get your way and pull back. And if it's, and this has to happen, if it's very serious, it has to happen in consultation with some wise people, because sometimes if you're, like, for example, in a case of abuse, this is a serious, extreme case. I would never say that you have to just accept this. I would never say that, right? Like with abuse, something has to be done about it. But let's say, for example, I'm trying to think of a good example of where a couple gets stuck. Like, let's say I have a good one. Like, let's say you always get stuck because this is a common one, and maybe easy for people to relate to. You get stuck because one person is always late. Like, they're late to church. They're late to church every Sunday. They're late to church. So we have to think, what are we going to do in this situation? We have one person, and when you do the work and you ask questions, you realize that this person who's late to church, actually, their family, when they were growing up, never like cared to get to church on time, right? And then the other spouse always got to church on time. What happens now? Every time, every Sunday, they get into a huge fight. They get into a huge fight. They just get into a huge fight. And by the time they enter the church, their heart has so much animosity towards each other. You might as well not go to church, right? And this, if your heart is full of that much anger towards your spouse, there's a few things you can do. One, you can come up with a creative solution. A creative solution, which is like not my way or your way, it's a third way, is to go to church separately. Maybe you can do that, right? If possible. Another option is to just accept that your spouse is going to be late. Just accept it. Like, that's it. I'm going to go to church late, but at least I'm going to go to church with an open and clear heart. I'm not going to fight with my spouse and go to church late every time. Maybe I'll go to a liturgy on my own during the week. Maybe I'll figure something out. But think about the disaster of fighting every Sunday before you go to church. This is the worst thing. And maybe the other spouse can set their alarm 45 minutes early. They can try to do something. But as you can see, we have to find a way to get unstuck, but do not allow yourself to be fighting before church on Sunday. That's the stuck, and don't get stuck. Like, just stop that. Don't fight. Do anything else, but don't fight, right? Don't get stuck, because you need to move forward. And I'll tell you one thing, which is sometimes the fight that happens in the morning on Sunday, in this example, will take until Friday to recover from, right? Because you're going to say things that are hurtful. You're going to probably get to church and maybe you'll make a passive aggressive comment to your friend in front of your spouse, and it's going to offend them. And it's going to take days to recover from. It may be even months. And then if your kids are watching, it's even worse, right? So you can see, like, once you're married, it's not about getting to church on time. It's not about getting to church late. It's about not getting stuck. That's the point. I hope, sorry, long answer, but I hope that's helpful. Stress management, identify stressors and make efforts to manage them. And that's something that you have to do. Like, don't expect anyone to manage your stress for you. Same thing with anger. And I want to tell you something, that there is nothing in the world, nothing, that relieves you of your responsibility to behave in a Christian manner when you're angry. There is no excuse. There's no justification ever to behave in an unchristian manner. It doesn't matter how angry you are. There's no justification. So you have to manage it, right? How do you cool yourself down? These are skills, okay? These are the skills. I'm going to move a little quickly, just because I want to make sure there's time for more questions. But if there's questions that people want to ask now, you can just ask them and we can continue another time. So if you don't know where you're going, you're always in the wrong place. If you don't know where you're going, you're always in the wrong place. And this message is about spiritual awareness. I want you to be aware of the ultimate purpose of your marriage. And if you don't know what it is, you're in the wrong place, okay? And I want to tell you 6 facts. First is that marriage exists as a means by which God reveals himself to you and saves you. That what that means is that marriage, God has a message for you personally in your marriage. God has a message. And please don't forget that there was a time when you weren't married, right? There was a time when you weren't married. And at that time, you had a personal relationship with God. When you got married, did your personal relationship with God stop? No, it continues. It continues. And God said that now you're going to get married, and now this is the continuation. It's the next stage of your personal relationship with me. That's one thing that God is telling you. And don't forget that it's a sacrament, which means that it's one of the ways that God is saving you and saving the world. Another thing is that marriage is a means by which God perfects you. God is fixing things in me and you through our marriage. God is fixing things. He is making us perfect through marriage. That's why in marriage, you discover a lot of challenges because there are things in me that need to be addressed. And this is one of the ways that God perfects me. God cares about your marriage even more than you do. So if you are really upset about your marriage, or you think that nobody cares, or if you don't care that much, I want you to know that God cares about your marriage even more than you do, because he's a part of it. He's part of this covenant. You have a calling from God, a calling for sacrifice, service, and submission to each other and to the world, This is part of what happens in marriage, that you have a calling to sacrifice, to serve, and to submit to one another. Marriage is a union that involves 2 imperfect persons. I don't think that's news to anyone, but both spouses are imperfect and they have stuff to work on. And God is present in your home and in every interaction you have with your spouse. And I want you to know that, please, that when you look at your spouse or when you're standing in front of your spouse, know that God is in the midst. God is right there. Okay, you have to personalize and internalize these facts so that you're clear on the purpose for your own marriage. Because sometimes we think that marriage is just this thing that culture pushes us to. Like it's the next step in life. It's the next step. So you just get married. But that's not what it is. That's the least thing. It's the most basic thing. It's almost nothing. That part of the message. What it really is a connection with the kingdom of heaven. All right, so number 3, sophisticating your perspective. Any questions or comments so far? All right. So this is an important message here because marriage is very complex. So you must think and approach your spouse in a more sophisticated way. And what I mean by sophisticated, I don't mean like elite or like a different type of socioeconomic class. I mean that you can't oversimplify what's happening in your marriage. So the hedge around your marriage involves you thinking about marriage in a more sophisticated way. You have to think deeply. You have to think about little details. You have to think carefully. You have to think. You have to be thoughtful, okay? And what I want to show you are 4 examples of a discrepancy that you might have in marriage, what it means to have linear and overly simplified thinking, and what it would be if you had sophisticated thinking, what it would be if you had sophisticated thinking. First is a disagreement. A linear or an overly simplified way is, if you have a disagreement with your spouse, is I need to convince my spouse that my opinion is accurate and theirs is inaccurate. Like that's the linear, overly simplified way of thinking. It's not sophisticated. But a sophisticated thinker, someone who has a sophisticated perspective, assumes, until proven otherwise, that their spouse has a different perspective on what is happening and a different experience altogether. And to put that in a different way is, if I have a different opinion from my spouse, I have to ask myself, like, I wonder why my spouse has that opinion. Maybe they're seeing it in a different way. That opens up like almost an unlimited realm of possibilities and what could be going on, right? If it's just you think one thing and I think one thing and we're disagreeing on that, that's so basic and it's not right. Like, the reason why we have different opinions is because we have different perspectives. We have different perspectives. We're experiencing the same thing in a different way. Oh, and then the next thing is, what if you have different perspectives, right? An overly simplified way of thinking about that is that my spouse's perspective is invalid. But I have to ask myself why I see things the way I do and why my spouse sees things the way they do, and that their perspective is also valid. It's also valid. You can see that there's a very famous therapist who has this nice lecture titled, "You could be right or you could be married. You could be right or you could be married." And the point there is that we don't want to spend so much time focusing on right or wrong as much as we should focus on understanding each other. Also, solving a problem, and I gave you an example of this, that either my way will go or my spouse's way will go. And we think of it as two options. There's only two options, my way or your way. But you can also create a third way or a fourth way or a fifth way or a sixth way. And sometimes when I'm working with a couple, I just ask them, what's another option, right? What's another option? And even another option is to try your spouse's way and see what happens. Just try your spouse's way and see what happens, and then keep going, right? If I'm hurt, there's another discrepancy. Sometimes my spouse does or says something, and now I'm hurt. Now I'm hurt. And the linear way of thinking is that my spouse is responsible for my pain. My spouse is responsible for my pain. But a sophisticated way of thinking is that I am hurt, but I shouldn't assume that my spouse intended to hurt me. And I know, like, I was just talking with someone, and this couple, and one person was speaking to the other, and then the way the other person responded hurt the person who was sharing something. The way the other person responded hurt the way the person was sharing something. And then because this person was hurt, they got so upset, they ended the conversation quickly, they cursed out their spouse, and then it was like, of course, nothing's going to happen there. I mean, that's not going to go anywhere, right? Just that part is going to take a few days and a few apologies and a lot of things, right? All right, so that's number 3. Number 4 is resources. This is part of the hedge around your marriage. The hedge around your marriage is highly impacted by what you feed it, So this is the hedge, and think of like a funnel, and you have to put stuff in this hedge. And I'll tell you quickly about 4 things. One is marriage education. Books, seminars, lectures, and workshops. These are things that we need to be feeding into this hedge. And please don't think that marriage and a healthy marriage is going to just come naturally. It never comes naturally. Actually, what comes naturally in marriage is problems and bitterness and resentment. That comes very naturally. Like, if you want to have a bad marriage, and I always love to say this, if you want to have a bad marriage, it's so easy. All you have to do is nothing. If you just do nothing, your marriage is going to be bad. And it's so easy to have a bad marriage. So you have to do this work of like learning about what I need to do. A community, healthy couples, edifying activities, and trusted people who can provide healthy and balanced guidance and advice. There is a really bad thing that happens sometimes in our community, and that's why I'm specifying healthy couples and edifying activities. Sometimes when couples get together, they like have this like habit of complaining about their married life or about their spouse. They just they're critical, they say things and they kind of joke around, they're kind of sarcastic. Sometimes it's a passive way of getting a message out in a humorous way, but it's not right. And please be careful and watch out for this trend, because it's very, very common. It happens all the time when couples would get together and they just start joking around and being sarcastic. And some people think it's funny, but actually it's not edifying. It's just simply not edifying. Another resource is experts, therapists and counselors and other professionals based on need, like for example, a financial advisor or someone that you might need to consult. And these are resources that you can take in. And lastly, it's prayer. Prayer is a well from which you can draw tremendous support at any time, at any time. And please don't forget that when you are praying for a change, ask God to change your heart as well. Ask God to change your heart as well. Lastly, are proactive behaviors. Proactive behaviors. The positive energy in your relationship is a core part of the foundation that you stand on during challenging times, And it helps to think of this balance that you have in your marriage. And think of this balance is energy, okay? It's energy, positive on the left and negative on the right. The positive proactive behaviors cost nothing, and you'll see what they are. They cost nothing and can be exercised regardless of what is happening on the other side of the scale. And the negative ones, often you can't control them. You can't control how big they are. You can't control when they happen. And it takes a lot of work and time to manage. Think of some of the negative ones. These are negatively charged things: stress, pressures, work, children, fatigue, fears and concerns, and health issues. These are things a lot of times you can't control when they happen. Like you could get stressed at work, you can't control the stressor itself at work. Children, you can't control them, or it's hard. And these things take a lot of time and work to manage. But regardless of these things that are happening on the right, you can always do the stuff on the left, no matter what. And it costs you nothing, right? Communicate love multiple times a day using your partner's love language. Spend one-on-one time with each other where you can connect. Check in with each other regularly on the state and quality of your marriage. Please have this conversation. And I encourage any one of you to start it. How is our marriage doing? What do you think of our marriage? Just ask that question. How is our marriage doing? Ask your spouse that question. I think it will open, hopefully, if you're slow about it and careful about it, and you have time to discuss it, and you're not worried about being distracted by children or something, you can have a very fulfilling discussion and listen and pay attention to what your spouse is saying. Be on the lookout for opportunities to give to your spouse. What you should do, these proactive behaviors, it's like you can always just do them. You don't need an excuse to communicate love. You can just do them. And also, why miss an opportunity to increase the positive energy in your relationship? Why miss that opportunity if you can do it? To say I love you, you can just do that, right? It's just fine. And when the challenge comes, you'll be fine. When I look at a marriage where the stuff on the left is not happening, they can almost be crushed by any stressor that comes their way, because the stuff on the left isn't happening. But when the stuff on the left is happening, you have so much resilience. So the hedge around your marriage, in conclusion, is skills which we must learn and practice, new abilities that lead our marriages to better day-to-day outcomes. Spiritual awareness, be deeply aware of the ultimate purpose of your marriage, and sophisticating your perspective, appreciate and engage with the complexity of your inner self and your spouse's inner self. Feed the hedge around your marriage with good things using good resources. And lastly, create positive energy that you can leverage in times of need. So that's all I had in terms of material. I don't know if there's any questions or comments or disagreements.
I had a quick question, Mukar. So you said one of the things is like look for a like try the solution from the other side. Like if we're in an argument and but my question is regarding if we are in an argument and we don't have a solution, like we cannot find a way or we cannot figure out what we can do, like how can we solve something like that if there's no
Yeah.
other way, like there's no two ways and we're not disagreeing, we just know that what's happening is not what we want, but we don't have another way.
Can you give an
Yeah.
example?
Let's say let's take the late liturgy example. Like you said, like you can wake up 45 minutes early, we can go on separate, like that's all, yeah. But let's say that none of these solutions are
You don't have
available.
a car, yeah?
Let's assume that, like,
Yeah.
and we know that we don't like what's happening, we both agree on that, but we don't have a solution, or we just know that what's happening is not good, but
We don't have any solution.
yeah.
Yeah, so like of course it's whenever this question gets asked, it's the answer, it always depends on what's going on. But I want to give you like a way to think about it, right? But it depends on the specific situation, which I know it's tough for anyone to share. But one, like I'm just going to give you some things to think about, right? One is consulting people you trust, like good people, just asking them, but only people you trust. Like don't just go to anybody. Like be careful because everybody has advice, but not everybody has good advice, right? And everybody has advice, but not everybody has balanced advice. So just we have to be careful. Another thing is think about who cares more and who is hurt more. Like who cares more about the decision and who is hurt more by the outcome, like who's affected more, right? This is really important, right? Because sometimes we both have different opinions, but like I can get over it, but I think my spouse is going to have a hard time getting over it, you know, if they don't get like what they're saying. And then the third thing is like just stop the disagreement, like stop disagreeing, like stop the process. It takes two people to disagree, like just accept the limitation, accept the brokenness of the world and keep moving, right? Because the cost of staying stuck is much greater than the cost of moving forward and not getting your way. Who shouldn't get their way? The question is who gets hurt more and who cares more, right? But like just please think about this point, which is that the cost of being stuck is sometimes much greater than the cost of not getting your way. So that's so important because you see couples, like sometimes I would see couples come in for sessions, and literally like they can have the same fight 10 weeks, 10 sessions back to back, and someone has to pull back. Someone has to pull back. Just pull back, like because once you pull back, you're opening the door is open now for the rest of life to happen, right? And you can see maybe there's other things that because you pulled back on this one, you can move forward, right? And you can gain a greater appreciation later. I know I'm not answering the exact thing that you're asking about, but that's just some things to consider.
No, it is. Yeah, I think I get what you're saying. Yeah. Thanks.
Sure.
There is a question, if you don't mind, related to the sophisticating perspective, okay, which is just trying to understand your spouse. So, for example, if you find in your spouse something that you find that is something fatal in your spouse, you're able to understand it, but you find something that's fatal. For example, you find that your spouse is stingy, and this is affecting the way that you're living together, okay?
Yeah.
So, if someone reached that point,
What's stingy?
what do you recommend? Excuse me?
What is stingy?
Bakhil.
Yeah, okay, here you are. Good job.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear about that so much. I know the Arabic word too. So yeah. So like someone who's cheap or stingy. Yeah. So you know, hey, like first I want to say that does someone want to say something? Being stingy, or this example. Number one, it could be you know what? Let me sophisticate my own perspective. Let me start there. I'll sophisticate my own perspective. And I'll give you a personal example, okay? When I was younger, my parents or my dad, like really, didn't like to spend lots of money. Like we didn't get a lot of brand name things, right? He had this like, it's in the Egyptian culture. Sometimes you can look at spending money with condescension, like why do we need to buy this brand name? Or we can make this at home, like why, or mama makes better food than this, right? Like this kind of thinking, right?
Is much better, yeah.
Yeah. So I remember just distinct example when I was younger, when we would go to get to the pizzerias once a week and we would get pizza. And I always wanted toppings on my pizza, right? I always wanted toppings on my pizza. And because I wanted to try them. But my dad would never want to get the toppings on the pizza. I was young. It wasn't my own money. I couldn't make any decisions there. So, and we would get home and he'd want to like put like cold cuts on the pizza and crushed red pepper and garlic. Like he'd want to do the toppings at home because he didn't think you should spend like $1 for 5 things of pepperoni, right? So, so growing up like this, once I started to make my own money, I started to love to get myself the toppings on the pizza. I always want to get exactly what I want. I want to do it exactly my way. I want to get the brand name stuff. I want to I'm not going to hold back, right? So someone can look at me and say, oh, you're wasteful with your money. You're irresponsible, right? You're spending too much money, right? So what I'm trying to say is that if your spouse, first, before just calling them stingy, first ask what's going on, like what's been going on in their life, maybe being responsible or careful with their money was how their parents survived when they came to America, for example, right? Also, maybe ask yourself, did my parents spend money to show their status, as one example? Like, because don't forget, I'm calling my spouse stingy. So what's my perspective? Why am I calling my spouse stingy? Maybe I spend irresponsibly. Maybe my spouse grew up this way. So before even putting a label, we have to be careful, right? Now, let's just say my spouse is actually stingy. Let's just say it's actually a problem, right? Now we're talking about character flaws. And we have to be patient about character flaws, because we all bring them into marriage. Everyone is bringing character flaws into marriage. That's it, right? So what do you do when you're faced with your spouse's anger, for example? Let's say your spouse has an anger problem. If you're getting hit or abused, this is a separate issue. We have to protect you. That's not right. But let's say your spouse has an anger problem and every time there's a fight, they walk away or they yell. Well, we have to work through that. You yelling back is not going to change anything, right? So the point is that we have to be patient. We have to pray. We can't fight the character flaw. Do not fight it. Like fighting will not change anybody. Like don't fight about it. So long answer there, Abuna, but
Yeah, Mahar, thank you very much. That's amazing. Thank you very, very much. Okay, so I like the point that we need to pray for that. It's very, very important, yes. Because praying, yeah, and as Mahar said, again, praying, when I ask for praying, I ask for praying to change my heart also. So I'm praying for myself, I'm praying for my spouse also. So thank you, Mahar. Thank you very much. Yeah, praying changed a lot of things. And I just want to say one thing, if you don't mind, Mahar, related to just consulting someone. Of course, we need to consult someone that we trust, but none of our big families should be consulted. I'm very sorry for just doing that. Not my mom or dad, not her mom or dad, not my aunt or uncle or whichever else, khalo, khaltu, all of these things, okay? Yeah, this category, okay? Yeah, shouldn't be just consulted in any problems.
yeah, Abuna, I just want to second that point, because it's a horrible, it's your family's input or influence in your marriage can become a poison to your marriage, even if they have good intentions. So please do not go to your parents, and sometimes your parents, not because they have bad intentions, but sometimes they like this feeling of, my child is coming to me for advice, because they stay connected with you when they really should have let you go, They should have let you solve it on your own. So be very careful about this, and don't do this to your kids. When they have a marriage problem, send them out, not to you. Never, they don't sleep at your home when there's a fight. No, none of this stuff, please. Like, yeah.
Any questions from our?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Ismi.
Hi, Makar. Actually, it's related to the pullback thing and the consulting. If the pullback is always done from one side, from the same side each time, and the other side is from the people who have the explosive flood, the character flood, and could yell and leave the problem and so forth. And the consulting issue is not like acceptable for the other side who yell and have this like aggressive character. The other side who pulls back and wait and pray, like till when, or what shall he or she thinks of other solutions, or you got me? You got what I want to say?
Yeah. This is a very tough situation, and you know, like this is also a character flaw issue, and what's going to be very important in this situation, and I'm going to say something. It might sound a little like I don't know, just crazy, but it's fine. What's important here is that you have to be very clear with God on what He wants you to do, because sometimes, and I would never I would never recommend this without lots and lots and lots and lots of work. But in some marriages, the separation is better. In some marriages, separation is better. And sometimes this breakdown of separation can not used as a manipulation tool at all or to threaten anyone, but it can be something that shakes everybody. It can be something that shakes everybody, right, in the marriage and in the home. But that's what I mean by someone in this situation has to be clear with God, okay? Because when if someone is getting yelled at this much, this is a form of abuse. It's like emotional abuse, okay? So you can't tell someone who's being emotionally abused, just stay there forever, right? So we have to be really careful about this and treat it with, and be willing to take these serious steps. Be willing to take these serious steps. And I can tell you, like, again, I would never recommend this in a general way. It would only be very specific. But sometimes children seeing an extremely abusive marriage, they're more hurt than if the marriage was not together sometimes. So, but it's important to be very careful in this situation and be clear on what God wants you to do. And also, I just want to say one more thing. And I'm saying this in general, not to any specific person, but if sometimes the person who is not yelling, the person who's not yelling is contributing to the problem. So, and it takes some care to identify this, because it's so easy to point to the person who's yelling and say the person who's yelling, they're the one who's completely responsible for everything. But actually both the couple are part of what's going on. And we have to be careful about that. Yeah.
Thank you, Makar. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Makar, I just don't know how to thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, that was so blessed. It was a blessing to have you with us, and this is so informative. And it's not only informative, but it's so practical. Thank you very much for that. And I thought that you're still in New York, but now that you're in Los Angeles, that's great. You're so close to us, okay? So looking forward, okay, if you don't mind, to have you with us. And God willing, after this pandemic ends, so you should come in person.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah,
It's a blessing for
you should
me.
visit the Silicon Valley, by the way. You'll find
Yes, sure.
all the high-tech companies in here. And by the way,
Thank you.
most of your customers are here, okay? are working for these tech companies.
Thank you. It's a blessing to be among you. Thank you so much
Blessings,
for
ours.
having me.
Blessings,
Thank
ours.
you.
Thank you very, very much. God bless your service. And shall we pray, or you do have something? We do have something